Hey guys, today we're going to be doing my February book wrap-up. Twas the shortest month of the year, but I'm pleasantly surprised with how many books I was able to get through. Audiobooks definitely helped me out this month. I listened to quite a bit as I was driving and working, so pro tip if you want to get through a lot of books. Starting off with a book that I feel like, if I'm remembering correctly, I mostly read in January, but didn't finish in time for the January wrap-up, but that is The Witcher, The Last Wish, the illustrated edition. This came out quite recently, and I was able to pick it up with some Christmas gift card monies, and this was a really beautiful edition. This is the first of the Witcher series that I've read. It's the first collection of short stories that kind of sets up the world and introduces you to Geralt, and I really quite enjoyed it. It's very similar, if you've seen the series, to mostly the first season, but there is a chapter or a short story that is in the second season as well. So it was interesting to see sort of the origin of those episodes, and I've really enjoyed the show the last couple of years, and it was also interesting to see how tonally different it could be. Geralt is a lot funnier in the books, and while I like the gruff sort of interpretation that the games and Henry Cavill have sort of put forward into the world, it was also interesting to see kind of a funnier side to Geralt, and this was a really great introduction to the series, and I'm really excited to pick up the sort of subsequent books, and I would love for them to come out with illustrated editions of all of them, because I don't love the current US covers, but oh well. I did give this one 4 out of 5 stars. I really enjoyed it. Again, I thought it was a great introduction to the world and the character, but I did find myself sort of preferring how the TV show handled it in some chapters, so that was a little interesting, and that's an unfamiliar feeling for me, but I'm really curious to see where the rest of the series goes and sort of to see how the show continues to hold up with the books. I think that'll be a lot of fun. Next up, I picked up a backlist title from Taylor Jenkins Reid, and that is Maybe in Another Life. I've really loved her historical fictions that she's come out with in the last few years, and I was really curious to see what her contemporaries read like, and this one was really interesting. This one follows a character named Hannah Martin and how one decision sort of changes her life in 2 drastically different ways. It follows 2 timelines, in one in which she goes home with an ex-boyfriend and another in which she decides not to. It was really interesting to see those 2 timelines and stories play out. Some information was revealed earlier in one timeline that the characters would find out later in another. So while it wasn't surprising to you, it was surprising to the characters, and it was a really interesting, I think, narrative experiment and experience. I think the setup sort of lends itself to the reader preferring one storyline over the other, and by the end some things did feel a little repetitive because of that sort of aforementioned revealing in one timeline earlier than the other sort of deal. But again, it was a really interesting story, and I liked the approach. It was interesting to see sort of an earlier work by Taylor Jenkins Reid and to see how her writing has evolved over time. I did give this one 3 out of 5 stars. While I enjoyed it, it definitely is not her strongest work. By the end, again, I had a preferred timeline, and I wasn't enjoying the other timeline quite as much. So interesting work in her catalog, but not my favorite. Next up, I had the buddy read with Stephanie for the month, and that was We Hunt the Flame by Hafsa Faisal. I have a vlog where I read this with her and discuss our thoughts, so if you want more deeper thoughts into my experience with this, I would recommend you go check that out. But overall, I quite liked it. It did feel quite YA at times, even though I think the characters themselves felt like they should have been older, or they were going through things that felt more mature. But overall, I thought it was quite unique, and I liked sort of the ancient Arabia setting that we got, where I feel like a lot of fantasy and YA fantasy is a little bit more Eurocentric. This was a really cool peek into sort of Middle Eastern mythology, and I don't know, that was really cool. I really liked the setting of this book. I think that's what stands out the most to me, having read it now. This is part 1 of a duology, and we follow a young woman named Zafira who is also known as the hunter in her community, but no one knows that the hunter is a woman because that would be looked down upon. She's just trying to help her people survive. There's sort of this curse upon the land. Magic was taken away a couple generations ago, and since then the different sort of provinces of this land have all had sort of various plagues set upon them, and her caliphate has to deal with a lot of snow and extremely cold weather, so it's hard to sort of cultivate anything, and so she has to go out into these sort of cursed magical woods where no one else can ever go without going crazy and hunt to help her people. Eventually she gets the opportunity to sort of undertake this mission that could help her people and the entire kingdom and break this curse that's sort of happened. It was interesting. I liked it. We also follow another character named Nasir, who is the Sultan's son, but he's also been raised to be a sort of cutthroat, heartless killing machine, an assassin, and we see them both kind of struggle with the darkness and lightness within themselves. It was interesting to see these characters come from like such different backgrounds and work together to try to bring magic back to the land. I thought this one was pretty good. The writing was quite beautiful, but it did sort of lose me in a couple places. It felt sort of vague in certain action sequences, and that really bothered me. But otherwise, this was a good book and a good installment. I'm looking forward to seeing how it wraps up in the sequel, We Free the Stars. I haven't picked that one up yet, but hopefully soon, and I gave this one 3 out of 5 stars. Then I picked up the newest installment in the Wayward Children series by Sean McGuire, and that is Where the Drowned Girls Go. This one was interesting. There have been sort of a couple installments in this series that feel very removed from the main plot line, but I actually quite enjoy those. This one kind of brought us back to the central plot line and the central cast of characters, but we do follow a character that was introduced sort of later named Cora, and she came from sort of like a world in which she was a mermaid. She's back in the real world having to struggle with living life on land again. At Eleanor's school for wayward children, she just finds that like the program and philosophy just isn't working for her, so she decides to go to a different school that also handles wayward children, but they sort of, instead of acknowledging what happened to them and trying to get the children back to their doors, they sort of like deny that anything ever happened and try to get the kids to be like normal again. And pretty much as soon as she arrives, she realizes this is a huge mistake, but there's sort of this central mystery kind of with what the school is and sort of the headmaster. And I thought it was really fun. It kind of reminded me of the first one where the group of kids comes together to solve a mystery. And I really liked that element of the first one. So this one felt like a good callback to that. And I really liked the characters. We get Sumi again, and she's always a fun time. I just realized I listened to this one on audiobook and I missed all the illustrations that were in it. What a shame. But yeah, I think if you liked the first one and you do sort of prefer that main storyline that is woven throughout this series, you'll like this one, and I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. Then after all that fantasy, I decided I needed to pick up a romance to kind of break it up, let my brain decompress, and I picked up Twice Shy by Sarah Hogel. This has come like extremely highly recommended. Pretty much every YouTuber that I've seen review this book has like absolutely loved it. And I liked it for the most part, but it did not live up to the hype for me. I don't know why. I also listened to this one on audiobook, and I think maybe the narrator's very southern accent put me off because it sounded fake. I don't know. I don't mind a southern accent, but like this one felt like over the top for some reason. So I don't necessarily recommend the audiobook, but it helped me get through it quite quickly. And this one follows a young woman named Maybelle Parrish, and she has always been like a hopeless romantic, but life just really hasn't quite worked out that way for her. She's been working at this like hotel resort for quite some time, and she wants to be an event coordinator, and she has the title, but she's still treated like the maid that she was for most of her time there. Her closest coworker at the very beginning, you find out, actually catfished her and like pretended to be a dude online for a really dumb reason. And that just really like annoyed me. And it's meant to, obviously, like it's meant to be an upsetting thing that has happened to Maybelle, but it really got under my skin. She gets the opportunity to kind of have a fresh start when she finds out this beloved great aunt of hers has passed away and left her this beautiful house sort of in the country of Georgia, and not in the country of Georgia, but like in the countryside of Georgia. That came out weird. But when she gets there, she also finds out that the house was also left to the groundskeeper, Wesley, who is super grumpy, and they are both super upset to find that they have both inherited the house and have to work together to sort of kind of merge their plans for what they want this house to be. It's definitely a fixer-upper, and in the process, they sort of get to know each other a little bit better, and they end up falling in love, as one does in a romance book. And again, it was pretty cute. I liked it. I liked Wesley. I thought he was an interesting character, but like, I don't know, it just didn't feel super special to me. I have a lot of fun reading romance books, but very few of them are like insta 5 stars for me. And this just like lacked that sort of special element, and I don't even know like how to put into words what that element would be, but this one was just fine to me. I gave it 3 stars. This year, one of the goals I've had is to sort of clear up my Goodreads want to read backlist, and The Husband's Secret was this month's pick. It's been hanging out on my want to read list for quite some time, and I owned the book, so I figured it was time to finally get to it. This is by Liane Moriarty, author of Big Little Lies, and after finishing this, I think Big Little Lies is still her strongest. This one was just fine to me. We start off with a character named Cecilia, who, while going through some things, has found this letter that was addressed to her from her husband to open in the event of his death. And obviously she's immediately intrigued as to what the contents is. She calls her husband like, what is this? And he's like, don't read it. It's fine. I wrote it like in a really emotional moment. It's stupid. I'm just going to throw it away. Don't even worry about it. And so now she's like, okay, what is this? And she really wrestles with whether or not to open it or not. That is sort of the central mystery in this book, is to like, what is in this letter? Obviously, it doesn't get dragged out throughout the entire thing, but like the repercussions of what is in the letter is life-changing, and the novel sort of tackles that. We also follow a couple other women in this community. One of them is an older woman who, like, I think 20 years prior, her daughter was murdered, and she's still really grieving her, and the killer was never caught, and it's something that really hangs heavy on her. We also follow a woman who comes back to this community after having been gone for quite some time because her husband and her cousin tell her that they're in love with one another, and she needs to get away from that situation. These 3 women's lives all sort of kind of collide, and the contents of that letter affect each one of them. It was interesting. I liked the way that their storylines sort of interwove with one another, but I don't know, I think I'm kind of over Liane Moriarty. It's just not exciting to me anymore. I liked the sort of play of the domestic and the mystery sort of element that happened in Big Little Lies, but it just feels like tired to me now, and I don't know, maybe that's kind of harsh. I did give this, I think, was it 2 or 3 stars? Let me check my Goodreads. Hold on. I gave this 3 stars, but it's honestly probably more of like a 2.5, and I rounded up. It was fine, but I'm not going to keep this book, and I don't think I'm going to pick up anything else by this author. The more I read, the more Big Little Lies just feels a bit like a fluke. Next, I picked up Christina Lauren's Love in Other Words. This is another book that's been like hanging out on my shelf for quite some time, and it was February, and I wanted to read some romance, and I felt a little bit burned recently by Christina Lauren. Just the stuff that I was picking up by them just was not hitting the way that some of the earlier books that I had read by them had, and I was really close to giving up on them. I figured I'd just maybe outgrown them and found romances that were more of a better fit for me. But this book really brought me back to them. Oh my gosh, this was beautiful. This was not a rom-com. All the other stuff I've read by them have been rom-coms, and this is decidedly not comedy. This one is more of like an epic love story, and it follows Macy and Elliot, and we kind of bounce back and forth in time. Macy in the present day is a fellow at a hospital, and she, at the very beginning, runs into a past friend slash boyfriend of hers named Elliot, they have a very intense history, and as we go back and forth in time, we learn what exactly unfolded between them, how they went from being best friends in each other's world to how everything fell apart. This is a second chance romance. It's also sort of complicated by the fact that she is engaged in the present timeline, and she has to kind of wrestle like her feelings for Elliot after all this time with like her current relationship, and it was so beautiful, you guys. I want Christina and Lauren to write more like this. This is the best thing I think they have ever written. This jumped immediately to the top of the list for me. I really liked the Unhoneymooners from them, but this is like number one in my book, and I want them to write kind of more serious, introspective romances like this because it was fabulous. I cried like a baby reading this book, like 2 a.m. trying to finish this book, sobbing on the couch. 5 stars. This was amazing. Highly recommend if you like Christina Lauren and you haven't picked this one up. I think this is kind of older. Not quite sure exactly when it was published, but like this is so underrated, you guys. Okay, 2018. So it's not like super old, but it's not the most like recent thing they've put out for sure. And it's definitely not the direction that they're writing, I feel like currently is going in. But this is a gem. This was so good. One of my favorite reads of the month, honestly, looking at this list. I think it's one of the only 5 stars, if not. Actually, no. Okay, it's one of 2 5-star books this month. Next up, I picked up a book at the recommendation of my friend Stephanie. She also bought this book for me for my birthday. So I've had it for a couple months and I've been wanting to get to it because I've heard it was beautiful. And it's The Inheritance of Arcadia Divina by Zoraida Cordova. And this was also a very beautiful book. If you like Encanto, read this book. It has very similar sort of vibes. You have this grandmotherly, like, matriarch of this magical kind of family with mysterious powers and this mysterious house. And it's definitely a little bit more serious and goes into Arcadia's past, which is kind of sad, honestly. She's had like 5 husbands, and you figure out like what exactly led from her birthplace in, I think it's not Colombia, where is it? I want to say it's Ecuador. I'm so sorry that I can't remember right now. And how she got to America, and it's beautiful. And it follows both her in the past as a young woman and also 3 cousins in the present timeline. Again, this was beautiful, magical realism, and like I said, if you liked Encanto, I think you would enjoy this. There's some weird stuff that happens, but it works. I don't know. The writing was lovely. The audiobook was also really good. I gave it 4 stars. It was a beautiful book. Next up, I picked up the much anticipated sequel in the Crescent City series, and that is House of Sky and Breath by Sarah J. Maas. I have very complicated feelings about this book. It's a chonker. It's like actually just as long as the first book is. They just use thicker paper and it looks way fatter, but it was definitely a tome and it took a while to get through. Not because it was bad, but it was a lot. I have a whole vlog where I read this book, and I definitely wrestled with trying to get through it as fast as I could to avoid spoilers, but also like enjoy the ride. This one picks up shortly after the first one. I can't get too deeply into it without spoilers, obviously, but we follow our main cast of characters, Bryce and Hunt, in Crescent City, and they're dealing with the repercussions of the previous book and how that ended and how that sort of affected their lives. And we also follow a couple more characters in depth. There's a Mer named Therian. There is a wolf shifter named Ethan. I'm missing a couple. Bryce's brother, Rune. Love that guy. Yeah, there's sort of lives in Crescent City and this rebellion movement that is happening against, or with the humans, against sort of the Asteri figures that kind of rule this world, as well as the Veneer, or the sort of more magical people in this world. Yeah, it's a lot. I don't even know how to sort of quickly summarize this book for the sake of this video. If you want my deeper thoughts, definitely recommend viewing that vlog. I don't know, the entire time I was reading this, I was waiting for the gut punch moment that House of Earth and Blood gave me. Sarah J. Maas, I think, is really good at writing this sort of crescendo climax and just breaking your heart and smashing it all and leaving you in pieces at the end. And that moment never quite happened for me in this one. There was definitely obviously a climax, and I was getting to a point where, like, I couldn't put it down, but it didn't hit the same as the first one did. And so I find that I didn't like it quite as much, but I think if you liked the first one, you'll like this one. It's very similar in theme and tone and writing. I've said this a million times in the past. Sarah J. Maas, not my favorite writer in the world. It is what it is. But she writes a fun plot and fun characters, and I like watching those characters engage one another. So this was a very character-driven book. You spend a lot of time just sort of hanging out with these people, and it's a lot of build-up. It felt like a very transition-y novel. So there's building a lot up to whatever the next book is going to entail. So I think it suffers a little bit from that second book syndrome, but I did enjoy getting to know these characters a little bit. And the ending was, it was what, if you know, you know. I have complicated feelings about that. And again, plugging that vlog, if you want my spoilery thoughts on this book, definitely go check that out, because there's not much I can say about it in this video, but I did give this one 4 stars, which is the same rating I gave the other one. I think they had different strengths and weaknesses, but I did like the first book a smidge better. So do with that what you will. I'm curious to see where this series goes, but this wasn't my favorite in this particular series or by Sarah J. Maas in general, but it was still a fun time. Then I listened to the audiobook of Under One Roof by Ali Hazelwood. This is her first in a series of novellas, I think called the STEMinist novellas, and they all follow women in science and their romances, and this one was quite cute. It was a 4-hour audiobook. I don't typically listen to romance audiobooks because it's weird having them read to me. There's especially like the spicier scenes. I just don't want a person reading that to me, but it's the only format that this story is currently available in, which is a little frustrating. The ebook comes out, I believe, in June, but I didn't want to wait that long, and my library had the audiobook, so I put that on hold, and I got it this month, and I listened to it, and it was a good time. I think I gave this one 4 stars as well. And honestly, the only problem I had with it was that it wasn't longer. I think the setup of these two characters, I can't remember their names right now. Okay, Mara and Liam was interesting. Another sort of inheriting a house situation to find that you've also inherited it with another person. Mara finds that her advisor has passed away and left her this house in the DC area, which is perfect because she just got a job at the EPA and she can't afford housing in DC because that's expensive. And she finds out that she's inherited it with her advisor's nephew, Liam, who is very upset about this because he's been living in the house for quite some time, and it is, in all purposes, feels like his, and Mara feels awkward moving in and intruding on his space, but it is legally also hers, so they have to kind of navigate that sort of awkwardness and stepping on each other's toes. You have forced proximity. You have this kind of enemies to lovers situation because they get off on such a wrong foot and have to overcome that, which was cute. I just wanted more time to grow from like this awkward animosity to being lovers. It felt a little bit rushed given the sort of novella format of this, but otherwise it was cute. I liked it. I really like Ali Hazelwood's writing. The Love Hypothesis was one of my favorite books of last year. I think it was so stinking cute, and this had a very similar feeling. So if you liked The Love Hypothesis, I think you would like this one as well. Again, still kind of salty that the ebooks aren't available until way after the audiobooks are, but it is what it is. And yeah, I gave this one 4 stars. Like I said, the only thing wrong with it was that it wasn't longer, and it's a novella, so I don't know how to reconcile that, but oh well. And finally this month, I read the second book in the Shades of Magic series, A Gathering of Shadows by V.E. Schwab. My main complaint about A Darker Shade of Magic, the first book, was that it was so fast, and it was fun in like that sort of nostalgic adventure story kind of way. You follow these characters named Kel and Lila, and Kel is able to travel between basically like there's these 4 different worlds, and they all have the city of London in common. Each world has a different sort of level of magic, and he comes from a very magical one named Red London. and he ends up meeting this character Lila Bard, a thief in Grey London, which is basically our world. There is no magic. Lila just wants to adventure. She does not want to live standing still. She wants to be a pirate one day, even though she's had literally no experience sailing or whatnot, but she wants to live that adventurous life, and she sort of runs into Kel and winds up in an adventure. It was really fun, and my biggest complaint with that one was that we didn't have enough time to sort of sit with the characters and get to know them, and this book delivered that so well. It takes place over a much longer period of time. Kel and Lila spend some time away from one another, but like, you can tell the effect that they've had on each other's lives was really significant. And even though they're sort of growing as their own people, they keep coming back to thoughts of the other. And I really liked how V.E. Schwab handled that. There's also a magical competition in this one, and I love magical competitions. They are my favorite, I think, sort of tropey fantasy thing. Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire was my favorite in that series. That's all I'm saying. So we have this magical competition. Lila is like, I want in on that, even though the champions were picked weeks before she even finds out about the thing. She tries to weasel her way into this competition. Kel is also participating, even though he's like the most powerful magician in his world, and that's kind of unfair. He enters it in secret. There's also a new character introduced in this one whom I love, named Alucard. His relationship with Prince Rai, Kel's brother, is just, I'm obsessed. And I don't know, I loved the character work in this book. It was so well done. I love V.E. Schwab's writing, and I think this one was the perfect sort of pace to juggle all these characters and all these events. V.E. Schwab just like juggled all these characters really well, and I feel like I got to know them so well in this book, and I really loved that. So I gave it 5 stars. I was reading this one on my Kindle, and it said I had 95%, like I was 95% of the way through. So I was like, okay, cool. I still have like 1 or 2 more chapters. The way that it ended was so abrupt, and like when I clicked to go to the next chapter, it jumped to the acknowledgments. I was like, that can't be it. That can't be the ending. And I was very tempted to throw my Kindle across the room. So that will inspire that feeling. I'm very excited to pick up the 3rd book. Thank goodness it's already out. Otherwise, I'd be furious. But yeah, I'm really loving how this series is developing. V.E. Schwab is quickly becoming one of my favorite writers of all time. It's got the feeling of a classic fantasy story, but it's definitely got V.E. Schwab's own sort of spin on it. And I love it. I love it so much. All right, and that wraps up my February reading. Like I said, shortest month of the year, but I feel like I read some chonkers this month. I'm impressed with myself, and now tired having talked that long, but yeah. Let me know if you've read any of these books down below. No spoilers, please, obviously, for the people that are watching who may not have read these, but I would love to talk about them with you if you are so inclined. Feel free to like this video, subscribe to this channel if you haven't already, follow my socials down in the description box below, and leave a comment if you'd like, and have a lovely day. Bye.